e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, c3, knight f6, d3, d6, castle kingside, castle kingside, rook e1, h6, h3, a5, bishop b3, bishop e6, bishop a4, bishop b6, d4, bishop d7, bishop e3, e takes d4, c takes d4, rook e8, d5, knight e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes a4, queen takes a4, bishop takes e3, rook takes e3, rook takes e5, knight d2, queen d7, queen c2, rook a e8, rook a e1, rook 5 e7, queen c3, queen a4, f3, queen b4, king f2, queen takes c3, b takes c3, a4, g4, knight d7, rook b1, knight c5, knight f1, c6, c4, rook c7, rook a3, g6, knight e3, king g7, king e2, rook h8, rook c3, h5, g5, h4, rook c1, rook h5, rook g1, rook h8, rook b4, rook h5, rook g4, rook h8, rook g1, rook h5, rook b2, rook h8, rook d2, rook h5, rook d4, rook h8, rook b1, rook e7, king f2, rook h5, rook g1, rook e5, knight g4, rook e7, knight f6, rook h8, d takes c6, b takes c6, rook takes d6, rook b7, king e3, rook b2, Rook Gd1. Rook takes A2. Rook takes C6. Rook A3 check. King E2. Rook A2 check. King E3. Rook A3 check. King E2. Rook A2 check. King F1. Knight B3. Rook CD6. A3. Rook D8. Rook takes D8. Rook takes D8. Knight D2 check. King E2. Knight takes E4 check. King E3. Knight takes F6. G takes F6 check. King takes F6. Rook A8. Rook A1. Rook A6 check. King F5. Rook A5 check. King E6. Rook A6 check. King F5. Rook A5 check. King E6. Rook A6 check. King D7. King F2. A2. King G2. King C7. C5. King B7. Rook A4. King C6. Rook A5. G5. King H2. King D5. King G2. F6. King H2. King C4. C6. King B3. C7. Rook C1. Rook A7. Rook C2 check. King G1. Rook takes C7.